Chapter 6 of the Second Son, Volumes 1 and 2. This is Volume 1, Chapter 6. Sir Barrimon's only company, as he awaited the council's order to return, was the secretary, whose indifference towards the Lord cheapened the view of his own celebrity in the new capital. The end of the workday was marked by the ringing of church bells throughout the city. A ceremony of remembrance for their dead emperor preceded by the archbishop's decree, but very few citizens attended those services with earnest affection for the lost overlord. As the din of celebration outside the chambers grew with nightfall, Sir Barrimon and the secretary remained silent as the pair nourished bitterness towards their sovereign for compelling them to miss the annual mourning. However, these sentiments could not be shared openly, so they merely exchanged irritable glances until Sir Barrimon addressed him. "How long does the council normally deliberate?" An absence of change in his posture or countenance suggested the secretary was disinclined to answer him, and instead buried himself in a large tome whose spine would creak as its contents were revealed. Upon realizing the secretary would refuse to respond, he shouted in a register he normally reserved for his imperiled squire, "I am a knight. I am a lord. You will answer me now." The secretary was thoroughly inoculated from outbursts of this sort, a consequence of his many years of service in that position, so he spoke plainly. "I answer to the council alone." Sir Barrimon huffed at the nerve, but knew the secretary would not have to capitulate, and the sentries on either side of the doors became his prospective fonts of information. The knight was not deterred from expressing his outrage to the armed guards, despite how they loomed over him by nearly a foot while fitted in the finest leather and iron-polished armor, polished gold, and otherwise immaculate. The clerk cautioned Sir Barrimon against molesting the watchers of the council chambers, and explained his arm would be swiftly amputated should he touch the handle and attempt to open them uninvited. Predictably, the knight was incensed by the threat, regardless of the secretary's judicious intent to paraphrase existing security protocol. He nearly raised his voice again, but instead drew from his wine pouch until the tension between them had deflated. A stillness emerged, and the quiet publicized Sir Barrimon's hunger when his stomach turned, which gave his company the impression his behavior was driven by famishment. All their unflattering inferences concerning their ennobled youth were confirmed again as they witnessed another testament of petulance due to the boy's apparent corporeal frailty. But soon the marble floors would be struck by the summoning rod, and the knight would cross through the doors into the chambers, still cursing the council under his breath. He wrenched the muscles in his face for a pageantry of false amiability, and his shrewd onlookers applauded the knight's departure from his father's brand of politics. They viewed his efforts to engender faith with charisma a preferable strategy to Sir Glasgow's methods of reflexive contrarianism, which, they asserted, would only result in further rebellion when the citizens of Wooloo were crying out for competent government, following the fall of Victorous. They saw Sir Barrimon's ascendance into their personal service as an intimation to those still loyal to the Empire, that if they had not sullied their own standing with the nobility, their family's history with them, even if a disputatious one, would no longer deny them the privilege of working at the council's behest. "Sir Barrimon," Councillor Dobbs spoke feebly from the right end of the bench, her voice failing from coral breath, an illness contracted by those who were constantly exposed to the coral dust manufactured for various medicines in the territory of Gilda. "We have arrived at a decision." Their pause invited him to speak. "What does the council command?" Councillor Crow grew a black afro that would likely be more usefully measured by a diameter rather than length, and it rotated stiffly like a midnight planet amongst the stars as he turned his head to petition his colleagues to speak before him. Councillor Arbor, a red-headed scoresman, conveyed his intent to deliver their judgment by leaning forward and cupping his hands. "We would like you to bring Still Morrow to justice. We want you to track him down and bring him here alive if you can, so that he may face Wooloo's judgment for his crimes. If it is not possible to bring him living and breathing, bring us his head. You will have whatever resources you need, within reason, to avenge the death of a most noble son of Wooloo, Lord Huvier Morto. This crime cannot go unpunished." Sir Barrimon felt that the distinction and pride that entailed the comprehension of the councillor's words diminished every other achievement for the remainder of his life. He was briefly mystified by his own majesty before he uttered his convictions to them. "Councillors, I am honored you would entrust me with so important and so personal a mission. The nobility of Wulu have faced deadly discrimination and barbarism at the hands of the rebels. I'll spare no effort to bring Stillmarrow to justice. The council will have its revenge. Wulu will have its revenge, Councillor Crow corrected him before advancing his concerns. Your confidence is reassuring, but confidence in someone as young as you is often a product of ignorance. How well do you know the man you will be hunting? This accusation might have injured him, had he not witnessed the same councillor snap the spine of his own horse 4 years earlier by insisting on mounting her despite his frame being in such excess. Once he recovered from the fall, he kicked his dying steed in the head repeatedly, and cursed her before she retaliated with the last of her strength to bite him. When he quite publicly shrieked and retreated from her, an anxious inspection by a doctor revealed not even blood was drawn. He forbade anyone from ending her suffering, so she writhed on the ground for several minutes until she suffocated, after exhausting her energy to breathe. Sir Behrman saw later the councillor was still issued a cast, and wore it in public for appearances. He also learned Councillor Crow was advised of several remedies for this recurring problem, and the public servant decided he was most keen on purchasing the largest horse on the continent to replace his deficient predecessors. The knight was aware no amount of charm would rid the council of the supposition he was a warrior of wanton blood, so he embraced their prejudices and lied shamelessly. I've seen him from afar with a bow. He's quite skilled with it, but he is a sharper swordsman. I saw it firsthand. I'm more than capable for the task. Aye, I've seen him too, spoke the most elderly member of the Council Rove Fortifont. He and Sir Glasto were notoriously antagonistic towards one another, but he seemed, for the present anyway, exceedingly agreeable to the progeny of his late rival. I saw him fight in a tournament near my estate in Lochtonshire. He's nearing 62, but he fights with the speed of a man half his age. It's remarkable to watch. You have my sympathies for your coming trials. I'll pass on your compliments when I find him, Sir Behrman replied cheekily, which had the effect of bringing good humor to the councillors, and he smiled at him in return. The old man rejoined, Please do, but until that day you will need a lead to follow. The sergeant was close with his captain Firo d'Intante. He may attempt to reunite with him, since they share the sin of abandoning their capital and its political vanguard to ruin. One of our informants reported the apostate in question became wanted in Caradros a few months ago, and serves the Odinite fleet under... Now this is rather sensational. Rove paused to examine the faces of his audience for their attention, and he continued reassured. He is a member of the venerated Captain Valara Victor's crew on the Ravensword. If Stillmarrow finds passage off the continent, he will become untouchable once the Odinites have accepted him into their service. One war at a time, as it were. Sir Behrman had been deprived of manhunts as a lad, his father forsaking them as the province of tasteless lords, suffering from painful boredom, and not sufficiently consoled by the company of their impoverished and half-witted serfs. They devised draconian laws to generate a roster for the sport of releasing freshly inaugurated criminals into the wild, and hunting them down using whatever methods the lords felt were most currently fashionable. Invitations were often distributed to notable members of the peasantry, implicating them in the violence, and stirring a deranged sense of camaraderie between the classes. Sir Glasto grieved for the labor lost. Perfectly good waste of hands, he would gripe. His forebears lived in poverty, but the industrial men would earn a fortune and a knighthood, in that order, by using slave labor to erect defensive structures all across southern Wulu. It began with a single nameless thrall he inherited from an uncle, who gave birth to a son named Ruki. That boy would go on to become Sir Glasto's chief administrator of discipline for his own society, but would later undergo a metamorphosis into a leader of local rebellion after Remelia's rise to prominence. Ruki orchestrated his master's public execution, and upon carrying it out, fled to the north. Sir Behrman heard rumors he was still alive, and occasionally, in quiet moments of reflection, would express gratitude for his father's murder because, without which, the emperor might not have been compelled to grant him his lands and titles so soon before his death. Sir Behrman nearly strayed too far from the present to hear the councillors instruct him. We will provide you with a writ to be furnished with whatever you require for your mission from the quartermaster. If it takes the evening to gather the soldiers who will accompany you, so be it. Leave at dawn after you are rested. It is nearing night anyhow. He understood it was decorum to respectfully withdraw from the chambers now, but he was possessed of such poise. He remained to examine their faces for the deference he felt his service to them had warranted. "Counselors," he uttered finally, before bidding them farewell, and seeking to tarry for the evening amidst the throng of activities. This course of action was derailed by an unexpected reunion with two lords, whose identity was briefly and awkwardly a mystery to the knight, as they froze in the lobby when their eyes met. "I can't believe it. It's the son of Sir Glasto." It was in that moment Sir Barrymon realized how vulnerable he was to flattery, but he dismissed these concerns to expand on the warm greetings of this splendid stranger. Shakespeare. "I'm Sir Barrymon, actually, since my father has passed, my lord." Just so. Well deserved. Hear, hear." The nobleman initiated another pause to permit his servant to introduce them. But upon a moment's consideration, he was reminded as to why the boy was absent. "Oh dear, I forgot we fed him the gonto mushrooms. I don't expect him to be lucid enough to find his way home before tomorrow." He prefaced the following with a deep breath and turned to Sir Barrymon. "I'm Lord Roderick, and this is Lord Doyod. Lord Doyod is from our neighbour Barrador, and has never seen the new council chambers, so I thought I'd show her." The knight politely inquired as to her impression of the sights, but she grimaced before saying, "I'm underwhelmed. As I have visited Victorious many times as a child, and the temples of the government there advertises that the rest of the empire lacks any imagination for palace architecture." "I'm inclined to agree," Sir Barrymon confessed. "My time here has been brief and without mirth, and I'm uninspired by the state of our current capital." Lord Roderick posed the question while gesturing towards the chamber doors. "You just met with them. Your safe returns to Capra was noticed and gave your contemporaries the succor desperately needed to endure such wearisome times. The deaths of our friends and colleagues throughout the empire has rendered our quilt of nobility threadbare." "I did," he responded in a tone that implied a disillusionment had come to pass. But the lord's latter words urged him to ask to whose death they were referring, and their bewilderment at his question brought the entire conversation to the summit of confusion. "Lord Houvier, of course," they answered solemnly. The knight was confounded as to how this information had already been disseminated amongst them, and how their feelings on the matter were already reported back to the council. Sir Barrymon sought to calculate the length of time he awaited their order to be addressed, and be issued his directives, but again his attention was diverted as the lords perfectly comprehended his cynical estimations of their new authority, and hoped to deliver him from his crestfallen state. Lord Doyot consoled him. "I think you need a drink. Come with us." He surrendered to their will immediately, as he soon realized the proposal to attend the party would mark his introduction to high society. His own event meant to precede his knighting was postponed due to civil unrest. A young boy charged with the delivery of messages stole food prepared for the occasion, and died of poisoning shortly after. His demise forewarned the knight and his consort, and the outraged employed their collective sagacity to retaliate against the penniless horde, directing the military to discard the remainder of their food in the streets of the poorest districts in the city. However, it went untouched until it rotted, as their constituents suspected the whole of it was tainted, and the spectacle provoked a 3-day riot only 4 months before Romelia's arrival at the gates of Victorious. "You must see Capra's River District. It's where we are having our soiree," Lord Doyot claimed as she twisted the end of her hair braid flirtatiously. Sir Barrymon guessed she was nearly a decade older than he, but her parents' expectations of her and of her lifestyle cultivated little need for caution or inhibition. Furthermore, he was drawn to her tendency to dismiss serious or worthwhile notions for pleasure in the short term, as if she were cursed with a fierce aversion to anything bleak or prudent. He speculated the dame was stricken by cynicism for her neighbors and nihilism for her soul. She touched his hand in an unmistakable show of tenderness and warmth, and being unaccustomed to such affections from so fair a creature, he might have fainted if it were not for the cacophony issued by the crowd as Lord Roderick opened the doors to leave. The knight recalled raid may be impossible to find on short notice amidst the jubilation, and his voice fell to a grumble the longer he spoke. "I would, but must attend to something, and I don't have my squire to do it for me." "We could send one of our messengers when we arrive," Lord Roderick assured him. "Whatever needs doing can be accomplished by my staff. My house is known for its discretion. They are like living statues." "Where is your squire?" the Lord Doliot inquired as she examined his armor closely for any blemishes. He reflexively scrutinized it along with her as he debated returning to the inn at the east entrance of the city and changing into dinner attire. Her wanting glances brought him to heel, however, and he decided he would not leave her alone for fear of boring her and losing her attention. Sir Beramon launched the briefest of investigations into Raid's whereabouts, but came out predictably unsuccessful. "Regrettably, I sent him off to join the festivities. I don't suspect I'll see him until late this evening." "Wow, he's as generous as he is handsome," she proclaimed, grabbing Lord Roderick on the bicep. "I'm sure you're popular with the servant girls." She blushed at her own compliment to the knight and changed the subject. "Everyone would be delighted to meet the son of Sir Glasto. You must come." "I will, if two conditions are satisfied." Sir Beramon grinned at her, and she reciprocated sincerely as she patiently awaited his demands. "If I can send a missive to the barracks to have 10 of the best soldiers prepare to go on a very long journey by dawn." "You have piqued my curiosity," Lord Roderick interrupted. "And?" The knight turned to address his muse. "If you'll take my arm, so my humble presence may appear glorious for but a moment amongst my peers for my debut as a member and conservator of our society. I rather treasure effecting a good first impression, don't you, Lord Roderick?" Sir Beramon finished while never averting his gaze from her. "Quite right," the lord rejoined, smiling at the pair, and offering them space to talk in private by walking to the edge of the crowd alone, and reminiscing on the joy he found in his own partner. She observed the knight now with curiosity plain in its abundance, and enraptured by the steel of his gaze as he gently slid one finger across her palm to renew the exhilaration of cradling her hands in his. The public intimacy was more than she could suffer at the moment, so she plucked herself free and gracefully slipped her arm into the comfort of his crook already positioned to accept her, as if they had rehearsed it. If if I may, I have an admission, Sir Beramon," she said with a peculiar inflection that suggested nothing of the nature of what she would utter next, and he nodded approvingly. "I know of your fiancé," she began solemnly. "Of course everyone in Wooloo likely does, and you have my sincerest condolences. To be immortalized in such a way simply rends the heart into ribbons. I lost my husband 2 years ago as well. He was riding to Capra and was ambushed by Liberalists. They told me he died immediately, which is all one can hope for in the end. How have you been managing? Are you in good health?" When she spoke the last, she ceased walking to hear his answer, as she noticed him hesitate in contemplation. "We've all lost someone dear to us," Sir Beramon said, moved by his own memory. "We will work to restore ourselves and our empire, but I'm convinced peace will always elude Wooloo. The rebels are savages, and we cannot spare them the sword if we are to achieve that dream." He felt her eyes withdraw from him, and her countenance flattened, until the joy she exhibited before had abandoned her completely. His breath stopped, but after a moment she blinked, and her relish for his company seemed to be restored, and his anxiety on the matter retreated. The knight spoke. "What was your husband's name?" "Franco Orgos," she replied, cheering the chance to utter his name again and revive her fondest memories. "He must have been quite a man," Sir Beramon said for the sake of propriety, but his indifference for a stranger's death contended with his true feelings of devotion already forming for her. "He was," she rejoined, "a man of learning, discipline, and courage. He always spoke of others with kindness. His spirit, I hope, lives in me still. I'd like to think someone so virtuous could reside in the heart of someone like me." "You do yourself too little credit," the knight began sentimentally and smiled. "I have known you for 5 minutes, and already my view of our fellow human has improved considerably." She awarded him her mark of good humor, and this appeared to mollify him as they walked in concert behind the crowd and along a small, unused boat ramp made of white stone. The restless river had whittled away the ancient construct to a polished surface turned forest green by the tufts of river hair algae joined to it. She kicked a small pebble into the water, and eyed Lord Roderick as he drunkenly meandered alone and ahead of them. As Sir Beramon raised his wine pouch to drink, Lord Doliot snatched it away and took a swig for herself. "Please forgive me, my faithful custodian, but I'm exceedingly thirsty." She wiped the wine with her free hand that dripped beside her mouth and grinned at him. "Help yourself," he simpered embarrasingly, and thus developed a respect for her born from surprise. To the young knight, she was bold and more mature than he, and seemed to possess a comprehensive clarity about life, along with the grace and intellect to impart her perceptions to others. The lace in her dress brushed against the naked part of his arm, and he shuddered eagerly at her company. He conspired with the moon to plot the sun's death, and invented other impossible tasks he would perform to prove his adoration for her. She gripped the knight's arm tight upon passing near a cloaked woman seated in the shade of a white stone home along their path. The woman raised her head, and Lord Doliot saw she was elderly, but with an uncharacteristically pale face, and jowls that dangled below her chin. She bore the likeness of a firm mound of vanilla pudding, and the lord observed the skin on her arms sagged deeply and flapped as she raised an empty bowl towards them. But it tumbled from her hand, and she collapsed forward in an effort to retrieve it. Lord Doliot picked the bowl up at her feet and set it before the elderly woman. She muttered a garbled thank you, and the lord noticed, when her lips parted, that her tongue had been completely excised. With all the evidence before her, she realized the woman was once a noble in southern Wulu, and was stripped of her wealth and her ability to speak, for failing to support the emperor before his demise. These souls were awarded the sardonic epithet, the pious patricians, because they could no longer make faithless utterances, and they surrendered all the prestige of their former lives in order to save them. But the quality of their descent that predominantly inspired the name was how they begged the temples of the gods to feed and house them after being cast into the streets. They were tentatively given refuge until they could master the tenets of their new faith and devote themselves completely to the church. The lord and Sir Beramont stepped around her and continued their way further up, ascending white stone steps with matching houses alongside. Lord Roderick hollered drunkenly at people gathered on the second-story balcony of a home adjacent to the noble's district, and he stumbled at the top of the steps. "Come! You can come too! Yes, you!" He was pointing eagerly at a woman in a light blue dress with white lace around the edges of her collar and sleeves. Lord Doliot shouted, with the countenance of amusement, "No, Roderick! Lord Roderick, she can't attend." Sir Beramont stepped away from her as she addressed his victim. Apologize for his behavior. Please forgive him." The woman gestured no offense was taken, as she did not want to shout over the music and jubilation occurring all around them. The crowd was corralled against the walls by the guards after they noticed Lord Roderick approaching. "It's fine, Percio. They're just having fun." And the sergeant of the guard stepped away from the commoners, and those taking his instruction followed suit. Lord Doliot spoke up with fear weighing down her words. "I've heard you've been charged with arresting Still Morrow." "I'm afraid I'm not permitted to say," he responded immediately, and relished that it was the truth. The shade fell on her face as they passed beneath the ancient oaks growing thick and like siblings in a row, one hardly distinguishable from another. Her thoughts were overrun with the violent and likely outcome of a duel between the sergeant and Sir Beramont. She found no comfort in her visions, as they relayed a sense of hopelessness to her, and no amount of her acknowledgement would stop them. She knew, if she devoted herself to someone so certain to meet a perilous end, after losing her husband in the same manner, it would raise the remnants of her heart, and she would never recover. A familiar dread reduced her spirits to dust, and she convinced herself, in that moment, there could be no future with the knight. Her grip on his arm loosened as Lord Roderick's home came into view across a wide green meadow. Sir Beramont smiled at her affectionately and hopefully, but she could only muster a poor imitation in return. The master of the house continued walking, but addressed them. "So, did you have a nice conversation?" The knight nodded, exclaiming, "Yes, we did," while Lord Doliot simply confirmed his contention, and again produced a vexed smile to accompany her falsehood. The house was painted white with curtains of pink silk flowing from a sheltered porch supported by pillars the whole way round. "Quite a lot of people," Sir Beramont said, leaning close to her as he whispered. "Perhaps we will let them draw their own conclusions about us." She knew almost nothing about the knight except that he was exceptionally kind to her, but she could not shake the notion something lurked below his amiable visage, a kind of ferocity that would arise as if he was emotionally rattled. Her reluctance to look Her reluctance to look him in the eye prompted him to probe her in search of learning the troubles that plagued her mind. After a time, she grew weary of resisting and relented, telling him everything. Lord Roderick waited awkwardly nearby until Sir Beramont would approach him alone, with his former companion abandoning the party in favor of drinking wine in the company of her cat, Chief Maester Rhino. Scene 2. Let me introduce you to everyone, the lord of the house began as he watched his friend leave through a guarded sandstone archway. Sir Beramont accepted the first drink offered to him, and finished it all at once. He knew these strangers would not give him solace, nor was he inclined at the moment to accept any from them. He was doing the business of dissolving the conceptions of his future with Lord Dolyod, and surrendering any notion of having a pleasant evening. However, his peers, in each successive mead, would bewitch the knight into dismantling his own bulwark of bitterness. Lord Roderick approached the knight seemingly refreshed in his levity, and said, "If your spirit is willing, I'd make a toast for you." "You very well should. It might be my first and last," Sir Beramont cackled, drawing the attention of his neighbors before he was immediately betrayed by his own compulsive recollections of the deaths of Bert and Wirt, and how a single arrow each was spent in extinguishing the remainder of their years. He slumped into a chair in the corner of the room and restlessly contemplated how his life might end soon. Lord Roderick gestured him to rise from his seat, and the knight acquiesced. He watched the lord wisp to the front of the crowd and wave his hands dramatically before the musicians until they lowered their instruments. The noise abruptly ceased, and his guest elegantly turned to listen as he spoke. "Everyone, you have been mingling with him a little, but I'd like to introduce the son of the late Sir Glastos Tiro, Sir Beramont. He is due to leave in the morning on an important mission for the Empire, so let us give him our well wishes." The crowd raised their cups to him and drank to his health. He continued, "We wish you the best, and we hope you catch the treacherous worm that deserted us to the foul and villainous traitors in Victorious, bringing ruin upon our houses and our empire." "It is my honor." But Sir Beramont responded with so little confidence, his audience pitied him, and the duty imposed on him by the council. Once their attention was diverted, he took his seat again and grinned as an aged, armored knight made his way towards him. They bowed their heads in concert, and the stranger spoke warmly. "Sir Beramont, I'm Sir Lenicus Arto. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I've heard many good things about your father and of your service to the Empire thus far." "That's quite a compliment coming from a veteran knight such as you, Sir Lenicus. I shall treasure it," Sir Beramont replied acrimoniously, as he spun his sword by the tip of its blade on the white marble floors. "I was a veteran 20 years ago. Now I'm just old. May I sit?" He responded with a grin in an attempt to disarm the young knight with congeniality. The young knight intimated the seat was his for the taking, and his elderly counterpart settled deeply into a cushioned chair. He sighed as his feet came to rest and took a swig of wine from his cup. "I've been busy the last hour or so, making arrangements." Sir Beramont watched the wine spin in his glass. "Well, that was prudent of you. I should probably do the same, considering, but honestly, I can't think of a single person that deserves my things. I love my things." "No," Sir Lenicus chuckled. "I beg your forgiveness, but I've taken the liberty of gathering 10 of my finest soldiers to go on this hunt with you. I know these troops well, and I believe my experience in the field would be an asset to you." The young knight withdrew in surprise at the proposal, and cocked one half of his face. "You freely offer me the breadth of your experience. Why? What do you want?" Sir Lenicus withheld his contempt for the notion his motives were self-serving, and stated simply, "It would bring justice to the many citizens that were slaughtered." "Justice, I think. That's what I want." Sir Beramont moved to gently negotiate the knight's surrender to him. "I'm touched you would feel compelled to help me, but I do not need those in my service receiving conflicting orders. If that does not agree with you, then you will need to find another way to contribute to the Empire." The seasoned knight knew that one could not simply declare authority over another. Power is only its perception in much the same way humans view order, and if its illusion is ever broken, a new one is certain to take its place. "I'll not give commands. Merely take them." The young man rubbed the growing hairs on his chin, implying through a pregnant silence he was considering accepting. "And what has driven you to such zeal?" he asked, carefully studying the old man's face for unwhole truths. Sir Lenicus recalled the grim details elucidated to him by spies. My brother-in-law was killed by rebels in Victorious because of Sergeant Morrow and Captain Firo. We were told his body hanged in front of the capital for months, among many other citizens of Wooloo. The longer he considered the facts presented, the more curious the young knight became. I see. Your story and, frankly, your character has moved me. I would not deny you or your wife your vengeance. I'd have a man of your experience gladly. However, it is a mystery as to why the council gave me this mission and not you, given your experience and your personal stake in the matter. It almost defies reason. In fact, that you were not chosen to lead this mission by the council tells me that you were not overlooked, but excluded by design. He explained firmly, but without malice in his voice. I have a history with them. A history of non-cooperation, but that was other matters. So long ago, yet they hold it against me. Those few lessons on politics his father Glasto imparted sprang to his memory, and he addressed him with dim erudition. Yes, I know. I'm not so young in mind, my lord. But had you cooperated with them, we would have lost the Battle of Lafayette Pass, and the security of our abundant farmland. My father explained to me why the council was wrong, but I understand why they were right as well. Taking troops from Illinois was reckless when one considers that scouts reported movement of rebel forces across the border in Brellian. They could have cut us off from a major trade route if they took back Illinois, and our grain shortage would have been exacerbated, leading to starvation in large parts of the country, and for our troops at war. The old knight was so accustomed to hearing this narrative that he concluded everyone he had attempted to clarify his reasoning must have refused to pass it on for fear of provoking the council. But if he was to tender his life and suffer the absence of his wife Chambry, it would be with one aware of the truth of his conflict with them, and so he explained. That's a rather reductive view of the circumstances. That reported movement across the border in Brellian was reported only once, and their young commander leading them forced his troops to traverse the gilded wetlands, which floods once every few decades, and births legions of disease-bearing mosquitoes with it. Never mind the sport gragulators would turn them into. Following an exceedingly heavy winter, I suspected these misfortunes would find them, and I was correct. Sir Barrymont nodded and grinned with sophomoric satisfaction. Yes, precisely. It was still a gamble, and it earned you the ire of the council, for your good fortune made them look foolish. Sir Lenicus resorted to personal testimony, an inclination we succumb to more and more with age, as the young noble seemed unmoved by his theories proven true. I must dissent. I knew of it because I witnessed it myself 32 years ago during the Brellian wheat famine and refugee crisis. The Brellianese fled in every direction for want of food, and all those that crossed through those wetlands during the flooding perished. Thousands of them. My intent was to save lives, not expose the council for their ignorance. Intent is rarely considered in matters such as this. It is their perception, which, unfortunately for you, happens to be a more palatable and less complex truth than the one you're peddling. Sir Barrymont finished his wine to indicate he was finished speaking, and shook his glass above his head in hopes of earning the attention of a servant for a refill. Sir Lenicus was faintly impressed with the gloomy and cynical young knight before him, and spoke earnest words of reassurance. You will not find a man more loyal to Wooloo. He nodded again, but respectfully as the servant furnished him with a full cup. I believe you. You have something to prove, so I know you will not lead me astray. The old knight stood and offered his hand in friendship, saying, I appreciate this kindness, Sir Barrymont. The young man took his gauntleted hand and waved with the other, as if politely dismissing the suggestion, accepting his services required any serious or mentally exhaustive deliberation. We ride at dawn. Meet us at the east gate. Sir Lenicus was certain the boy's awareness of his conflict with the council meant he would likely assign the blame to him if they failed to capture Stilmaro, and Sir Barrymont would testify mercy for a grieving countryman compelled him to accept his proposition. However, he would never reveal those reservations to him, and instead nodded before departing the manor to return to his home hastily. His lodgings were quaint, and resided on the edge of the noble's district more than a mile by foot. Upon arriving, Chambry smiled when she heard his face as he walked alongside the house, and knew by the lightness and quickness of his step he bore good news, and was eager to share it. He appeared in the doorway and fixed his eyes to hers, smiling in return. She laughed in long-awaited celebration and kissed him on the lips before he spoke. Sir Behrman has agreed to allow me to accompany him on the mission. I'm going to bring Stilmaro to the council to be publicly tried. Chambry returned to the dinner she was preparing, and was already dreaming of her husband's safe return. Barrow will lay in peace. His body may have rotted unburied, but so will his executioners. The last she uttered ferociously, but her face could only bear that fury for a moment, as she was a creature of unparalleled kindness, and soon her lips and eyes would turn downwards in regret for yearning for such violence. I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. Justice is what we should desire, not vengeance. He kissed her on the forehead, and wished his affection could impart to her the depths of his devotion to her before he left. She and her brother Barrow were bound together by a shared disposition for being inordinately compassionate towards others, and this predilection eventuated in his death when he attempted to spare innocents the carnage of the rebellion, by way of the sewers. But he drowned once the rain flooded them. It seems the council has given Sir Behrman leave to pursue Stilmaro to the ends of the earth. Well, you should try to catch him sooner than that, she said, grinning at him playfully as she adjusted the cloth beneath his chest armor while loosening the straps to remove it. He leaned his head away to make room for her efforts and said, Lord Huvier was popular. Depraved, but popular. It seems that every noble in Wooloo rose up in unity to condemn Morrow and demand his head. I understand their loyalty. Lord Huvier avenged many of them when no other house had the competence to muster the forces to do so. They felt indebted to him and his wife Mariana. You must remember. She began stroking his cheek before settling them gently on his shoulders and staring up at him with longing, knowing her exact words would only serve to bring further death into an already brutal and indifferent world. But she would never absolve herself of guilt if she allowed him to leave without some wisdom. If you commit yourself to catching him rather than killing him, you'll be smarter in your methods. Please be smarter. Please be safe. Sir Lenicus kissed her forehead adoringly and lingered with his lips on her skin. I must go. Please see that Magwood attends to my armor and prepares my things for the journey. I'll be back in a few hours, and when I return... He squeezed her behind, and she hooted in mutual appetite, grinning at him coquettishly. Scene 3. His armor artfully arranged on its stand, he proceeded into the streets. The crowd was eulogizing their late sovereign by singing a famous ballad called The Emperor's Finest Moment, which was a derisive reference veiled in praise to the fact that the song concerns an entirely fabricated victory of their ruler in single combat against the champion of the Polemarchs, Wooloo's only state equal on earth. A handful harmonized in shrill voices, mocking the Emperor's delivery when he attempted to perform a different patriotic folk song in front of a congregation of loyalists 5 years earlier. Their Hallows End masks supplied them with the anonymity for such conspicuous protest, but the guards bearing witness decided dereliction of duty was preferable to inciting a riot to conserve the pride of a dead man. The stablemaster was shoveling horse manure into a wheeled cart to be sold as fertilizer, and Sir Lenicus interrupted him. Ho, Sawyer! Sawyer set his tool to the side and smiled pleasantly at the knight as he brushed his grey, shaggy hair from his face. Ho, Sir Lenicus, what can I do for you? You heading somewhere? Naked like that? The old knight inspected himself and chuckled. Not at the moment. I'm leaving at dawn, and I need 14 saddled horses ready for what may be a very long journey. Sawyer's eyes widened as he was bewildered by the size of his party. I know better than to ask, my lord, but 14. Wooloo deploys just one of us, or 10,000. 14 is an odd number. But I wish you the best on your mission. Your order will be fulfilled, don't you worry. The stablemaster was correct in his supposition, as the Empire was rather heavy-handed for many years, and in others, espionage and assassinations were the prevailing strategies. But hardly was there ever a sensible middle ground ever achieved by the Emperor and his council. The knight's attention was restored, though, and he spoke. You're a good man, thank you. And the butcher awaited him nearby expectantly in the same market square. He reflected on the tales of Stilmaro's valor and proficiency in combat, pondering the outcome if he were to face if he were to face him alone, as he approached the butcher amidst her humming songs of similar sentiments of those aforementioned, and he spoke above the babble of the crowd. "Ho, Viole! I need all the dried meat that you have." She suspected, for a moment, he was only teasing her, and she laughed heartily before replying, "My lord, you cannot carry all the dried meat I have on 5 horses." He watched her turn away and wipe her face clean of sweat, while she remained pleasantly occupied by his surprise to enrich her. "Well, that's good news, because I have 14. She clapped her hands and joined them together in veneration and jubilation for nominating her to supply him. "You're going on a journey." The knight nodded. "I am. Your payment will come from the council." "Where should I have it delivered to?" she asked as she began assembling his order in coarse threaded brown sacks. "The barracks, and note it is for those who accompany Sir Baramon, and distribute it evenly among themselves," Sir Lenicus replied, stepping away from her stall, signaling their time together was at an end. She reached out and said hurriedly, "I'll take care of that last bit, my lord. And if I could be so bold, I've other goods, since the council is paying." The old knight stepped forward, and with genial brown eyes, half closed in delight, he spoke softly, "I'll take whatever will stay for more than a few weeks." She reciprocated his clandestine efforts, and while bearing a smile that would eventually send her cheeks into fits of soreness, replied almost inaudibly, "Thank you, Sir Lenicus. You are very generous." His jolly demeanor animated the friendly lookers-on as he made his way to the barracks, which was strategically constructed outside the nobles' river district and functioned as the physical barrier to segregate them from the impoverished. 2 guards saluted him and said as he approached, "My lord." Upon entering the torch-lit building, he discovered his troops already at their bedsides and assembling their equipment. Those present were named Marvo, Sergius, Ninka, Haiti, Lero, Deso, Waz, Vinci, Dor, and Fez. They noticed him drawing near and looked up as he spoke. "You were the only soldiers the 16th Legion was willing to part with," Sir Lenicus joked as he feigned disappointment at them. Their expressions were cheerful at his mischief, and Nika greeted him wearing her reverence for the old man out for all to see. "Sir Lenicus, surely you came to wish us well. Where will we be going? Do you know anything about Sir Baramon?" He raised his hands up to her, gladdened by her enthusiasm, but gesturing her barrage was unnecessary. "I came to tell you I'll be joining this mission. However, Sir Baramon will be in charge. I'll merely be coming on as an advisor and another blade." "I feel much better going after Stilmaro now," Dor replied, exhaling with puffed cheeks in relief. The knight addressed them all soberly. "He is formidable and very strategic. He will have 5 escape plans if we find him, so we will need to be ready to execute on a moment's notice." Haiti tugged at the straps of her thickening thighs and said, groaning, "My armor don't fit no more, my lord. I can't get her on." She collapsed backwards onto her bunk and roared as she hopelessly sought to maneuver the end of the strap through the buckle. Eventually, she surrendered and lay staring at the bottom of the bunk above her. "I'll have to get it all refitted. God's damn it, Mero is going to despise me more than he already does." "You shouldn't have turned him down. And blacksmiths having to be good with their hands, I hear, so it shouldn't take long," Marvo replied impishly. "Bring him something nice along with the promise of payment. I'm sure he'll survive a long night of work. He has a duty, just as you do." Sir Lenicus instructed sagely as Sir Baramon appeared. The young knight's countenance quickly mutated into one of overwhelming indignation at the sight of the old man addressing troops intended for his service. He slowed his pace and cocked his head. "Sir Lenicus, may I have a word with you in private?" He responded, absent any trace of umbrage in his voice, towards Sir Baramon's theatre of authority. "Of course," and he started for the door. The incensed knight did not delay in further abusing the esprit de corps of his future company. "No, they will leave," his finger aimed at the soldiers and effecting a querulous debut. Sir Lenicus evidenced his deference by nodding to signal his comrades to depart without protest. Once they were beyond their sight, Sir Baramon scowled into the scarred and leathery face of his senior. "I thought I was quite clear on the conditions of your company on this mission." Sir Lenicus stood to his full height, towering now over his puerile counterpart, and spoke with resolve. "You were, and I was clear to them that you would be in charge, and I'd merely be there as an advisor." The knight conceded the argument immediately upon perceiving the elderly man before him bore no crook in his back, and the decades of fighting had not weathered the mark of his youth so much that Sir Baramon's lack of equal skill with a blade could overcome this warrior of eminent frailty. He addressed him with great care. "That's very good, thank you." "You're welcome," Sir Lenicus replied as he casually rested his hands on the pommel of his longsword jutting out between them from his hip. "I've also taken the liberty of notifying the stable master of our need for horses by dawn, and procured us some food and other rations to be delivered to the barracks soon." With his youthful choler evaporating by the warmth radiating from the lit hearth beside them, he rejoined awkwardly with an unwitting confession. "I appreciate you attending to those matters, but it will only be a matter of time before my squire returns, and whatever other preparations are necessary he will fulfill. You are serviced by Raid Aranon, are you not? The late Sir Emero's squire. Where is he? I'd be most pleased to meet him, given his personal history with my old friend." The knight examined the room and confirmed he was not motionless and hidden in the shadows of a bottom bunk. "Frankly, I'm confounded by Sir Emero's judgment. In my view, Raid is no more remarkable than any other squire I've come across, and I believe your first encounter with him will be underwhelming." He waved his hand dismissively. "Regardless, I afforded him leave to join the celebrations of the Emperor's birthday. I have no idea where he is, but he's somewhere in the city." Sir Lenicus found the Lord's disparaging comments about Sir Emero the absolute height of irony, as he challenged the young man to ruminate on electing to grant liberty to his squire on the eve of a manhunt. "You gave him the night off just before a long mission." Sir Baramon responded with a bearing of insouciance. "We were already on a long mission, so in my mind it was something more of a reprieve, but however much I regret granting him this time away, he's earned it, I suppose." The young man searched the room for a seat when his comrade offered a sincere compliment. "That was very generous of you." But it possessed such similar wording to praise previously alleged by the Lord Dolyat, he presumed it was not a coincidence. "People keep saying that to me as if they are surprised they are uttering the words to begin with. Do I have a reputation for cruelty I'm unaware of?" He crossed his arms and was primed to exonerate himself for any trespasses against his constituents, but Sir Lenicus summoned no testimony to affirm his suspicions of reported wrongdoing. "There are no rumors of your conduct towards your squire, if that's what you mean," he said, as he rubbed the burgeoning stubble on his face. Sir Baramon withdrew from the subject and spoke favorably instead. "Raid is reliable and quiet. I enjoy that part about him." He applauded the transition from his characteristically scornful remarks and on to more endearing considerations. "He does seem to keep to himself. I met him, very briefly, and when he was quite young. Sir Emero had just emancipated him from what would have been a meaningless death in youth, due to all the hazards that plague the poorest and feeblest of us, and he transformed that mud into something worthwhile in armor. Raid is studious and quick, and he fights well, from what I saw anyway. His success was at the center of my prayers for so long, but once I heard he might have abandoned his champion, my friend, in his greatest hour of need. I yearned for perdition for his soul. But I was wrong to wish for such things. He is a boy." Sir Baramon was growing tired of discussing his ward in such glowing and laudatory terms. "He is a very capable fighter when unarmed, but when given a sword he falters. You should see him. Honestly, it's as if you're watching an old man swing a cane at a bloodthirsty pigeon. The total absence of grace in his movements has convinced me he is drunk at every given moment. It's why I never offer him any of my wine. I don't know where he gets it. Sometimes he goes off into the night with no explanation. I suspect it's to drink." The old knight was detectably amused by the visual, but would clarify Raid's deficiencies on his behalf. "Sir Emero trained many knights, and he always spent the first years teaching them how to fight without a sword. That kind of training is very useful in my experience." The young knight smirked at recalling their most recent contest at Jose's home, and the grim memories of blood dripping from the ceiling after the battle was won. "I can personally attest to its usefulness," the presumptuous knight began, hoping to impart his wisdom to this relentless and stubborn hero from yore. "But if being unarmed were superior to wielding the sword, I'm certain that would be reflected in warfare. But it is not this way." Sir Lenicus hoped to terminate their conference, so the others could return and rest for the evening. "You speak the truth, but not the whole truth. Anyway, I believe it's time to retire to bed." The young man reviewed the hour and saw the clouds gray in spirit with the promise of rain, but glowing orange where they touched the horizon. Sir Baramont said, chortling, "The sun has just set. How old are you, exactly?" The old knight's measure of diplomacy had been exhausted, and he stated the following hastily. "Do you feel so familiar with me you are comfortable asking?" Sir Lenicus turned away briefly in disbelief and finished with a glare. "What does it matter?" "I suppose it doesn't," Sir Baramont said as he withdrew from the room, hoping to avoid awarding him the impression it was a retreat. The Lord in Twilight amended his tone before speaking. "Good. Let us finish our preparations for tomorrow, then. I'll return home to my wife, and spend a few precious moments with her ere we depart. Do you have someone special now? I'm aware of your fiancé's death. It was vicious. I'm so sorry for your loss." The knight shrugged, but felt his hands and voice trembling as he spoke. "Our engagement was quite short. Nevertheless, Fielda was a lord of Wooloo and deserves justice." Sir Lenicus was troubled when declarations of disregard for the loss of someone beloved were advanced by lonely soldiers. Military life is uncertain and unpredictable, and thus your thoughts often orbit the only fixed object in your universe, your loved ones back home. "I agree," he answered, recalling all the faces of his troops he nurtured amidst their unresolved grief when he commanded his own unit. He would deliver the bereaved to a chair beside a window that faced the green-gray sea, and light a fire in the hearth near their feet. With his hands rested upon his lap, he sat across from them silently and graciously, so they might finally weep long-awaited tears in private. The knight believed there was no sorrow that could not be mended by paternal affection, and he offered this consolation by learning about their shared history while feeding them a warm meal with tea. Sir Baramont would never elect to endure something sentimental and revealing in nature, so Sir Lenicus did not offer his solace. "It was a pleasure meeting you, but I'll retire now," the young lord politely announced before stepping away to depart his chambers. "Good night, Sir Baramont," he answered as the soldiers returned to their beds in the barracks to sleep. "Good night, Sir Lenicus," he shouted with finality as he proceeded into the cooling darkness of night. Scene 4. Lord Roderick's home was abound with frisky and festive drunkards pursuing companionship to succeed the singles affair arranged by the master of the house. Despite his protestations, the lord's wealthier colleagues that foiled the mating ritual dispatched their servants to locate an assortment of bodies willing to please them for a nominal fee, and bring them to the manor. The supply of naked and willing flesh arrived, and the carnal inclinations of their employers were satisfied over and again. Fleeing past the guards unnoticed, Sir Baramont was brought to a halt in a darkened hallway by a young woman with black hair and a striking face in torchlight. His breath quickened as her hands guided him into an empty room. Once their yearning was spent, he abandoned her to find the staff for the purpose of deploying them to unearth Raid's whereabouts in the pub district, and order him to join the knight at the lord's estate. Those servants charged with the errand returned without him, claiming the squire had not been seen by any proprietor of any pub within a reasonable distance in Capra. The knight was offended by his protege. His protege would wander from his orders, and urged to Lord Roderick's staff that the continuity of his generous spirit was predicated on Raid's immediate recovery. His threats reflected his impotency in fulfilling his own petitions, and despite the assurances of strongly worded complaints to their immediate superiors, no trace of his ward could be found. He slumbered well into the morning after a restless evening of speculating when the squire would emerge, but he was awoken a little before lunch by a ceaseless, impatient knocking at the door. "What?" Sir Baramont shouted as his eyelids slowly parted to accommodate the light. The door came ajar, and Fez stood before him, black-haired, and wearing a black tabard decorated by a stitched red quarter-moon, hanging below his waist atop a uniform of polished chainmail, and leather gloves with boots to match. He shuffled into the room and began meekly, "My lord, Sir Lenicus, he was requesting your command for us to depart, if and that be agreeable and such, my lord, sir." The knight forgave his lack of decorum as he squatted at the edge of the bed and relieved his bowels into a short wooden bucket. The soldier awaited his orders with rigid but thorough revulsion. "Remain here," Sir Baramont started. "I take it my squire was never found, so I'll need your assistance donning my armor." Fez nearly retched at the putrid smell and the gale of floating excrement that escaped the lord's innards first, before ascending invisibly through the unsealed portion of the bucket he occupied. He trapped air in his lungs and imprisoned it to spare himself the offensive odor, but after a time his want for breath superseded that desire, and he was forced to inhale desperately, and drawing the lord's attention as a consequence. Sir Barrimont stood, wiped himself clean before pointing at the bucket of his waist. Be a good lad and take care of this, will you? And be quick about it. We're behind schedule. His obsession from the previous evening once again occupied his thoughts, but he persuaded himself that Raid's disappearance could not take precedence over capturing Still Morrow. After dressing, he bade Lord Roderick farewell, and left the manor with Fez lagging behind him. As the two arrived at their company awaiting them at the east gate, Sir Lenicus offered his consideration. Where is your squire? Sir Barrimont grew uncharacteristically quiet before he confessed, I don't know. He never returned last night, and an unsuccessful search party was dispatched near midnight and found no trace. Sir Lenicus withdrew into grief and thought of the boy's fate, and declared while his head shook, This is grim news. Raid Aranon would not simply abandon his duty. I know him that much. I'm inclined to agree, he began earnestly, while compulsively gnawing the tip of his thumbnail. In the 2 years he has been my squire, he's had many opportunities to flee and let me die, and never took them. Something is wrong. The horses circled one another, anticipating the swiftness that would be required of them at any moment. The old knight searched the horizon for wisdom before suggesting, Perhaps let us notify the local magistrate. Yes, Sir Barrimont agreed, and forwarded his attention to a soldier near him. Who are you? Marvaux, my lord, he answered before leaping from his steed and approaching the mounted knight. Marvaux, do your lord a service and travel down to the local magistrate's office to notify the clerk of Raid Aranon's disappearance. Take this ring as proof of your mission. He revealed a glistening gold ring molded around an exquisite sanguine ruby in the center. Move along, hurry up. He cast sardonically after the soldier as he trudged hurriedly through the muddied streets. His athleticism astonished the young knight as the soldier returned, by all appearances unruffled by his assignment. He breathed calmly, and absent any strain, as he mounted his steed again. It is done, my lord. The company tarried no further upon hearing their lord announce, Good, let's ride. Their steeds' hoofbeats disturbed the still air around the villages, and stirred those curious from their labor-induced stupor to view the nearest event to a spectacle they had witnessed all day. Their trail was carved into the soil, and meandered through a meadow hosting eager insects, feasting on the abundant pollen emerging from the spring flowers. The sky greeted the convoy with bone-white clouds, offering no hint of rain, but still supplying shade from the sun. Sir Barrimont was apprehensive when he examined his future without his squire. Raid had earned his trust as a reliable shadow he cast, an extension of the knight's own power over his environment. The young man finally concluded he would inquire after him once he had the time, the inclination, and the resources to do so. He considered other potentialities, such as Raid's gluttonous tendencies with alcohol, would exact its revenge in the form of an excruciating hangover. The squire would be discovered asleep in the back alley, and awoken by an ill-humored guard with a swift kick to his ribs. The whole affair, he thought, would render him utterly humiliated, with additional embarrassment upon learning his lord had departed Capra without him. These were nothing more than bids to pacify the anxiety thriving in his mind, though, as Raid lacked reckless blood, and he would not indulge himself so much that he overslept. He had no history that contradicted his suspicions that a nefarious plan had been executed successfully. He recalled their homecoming to Capra, and how Raid looked upon a girl in the distance with such longing. The knight theorized his virgin student hazarded that a woman blowing him a kiss was certain to be partial to his company. Raid has always been dreadful with women, and he would marry the first girl who was nice to him. He smiled, as he was amused by his own observations. Sir Barrimont trotted alongside Sir Lenicus and spoke over the hoofbeats. I have a suspicion that Raid was taken by rebels operating in Capra. It's only a feeling, nothing more. The old knight was hypnotized by the tour of growing wilderness, but its spell was broken, and he responded, Pray tell, what evidence you have to suggest such a thing? I have none, he growled. As I said, it's merely a feeling. Listen to your instincts, I say, the elder responded, shifting in the saddle. Sir Barrimont nodded, and slowed to a stop as they approached a fork in the road. Peering east, he pointed and spoke. Still Morrow, we can be sure, did not go into rebel territory. He may have fled at the sight of them at Victorious, betraying all of us, but he killed too many of them before that, and earned a reputation with them alongside Captain Firo. He will likely have gone through more neutral territory. Their attention faced west, and the sun blinded them. They shielded their eyes until Ninka addressed him. My lord, he may have gone through the Pala Mountains, It would be the closest and safest route to avoid all manner of people. Vinky balked at her assertion. People are not the danger in the Palo Mountains. It's riddled with dire bears and mountain tigers, so I very much doubt it. He is also alone. Shush, both of you. Sir Baramon awarded their comments no more scrutiny and asked, Sir Lenicus, your thoughts on the mountain pass? The old man huffed and spoke briskly. Well, it is as they say. 'Tis the closest and safest route if you're only worried about people. But the beasts that hunt those mountains own them. I know not if he would survive alone. The young knight was pensive, and he explained his reasoning for the benefit of hearing himself utter the words. We cannot split up, as I've seen him kill 4 people in the span of a minute. We will need all of us to capture him alive, or at the very least most of us to kill him. He proposed another suggestion. What about Gilda? Sir Lenicus nodded approvingly, and gained the consent of his company through contented looks. I thought the same thing. It is worth considering now that we are at a crossroads. That would provide him access to the ocean so that he might sail away unmolested. Sir Baramon assumed as the sky darkened with every passing second on the path. Sir Lenicus raised his doubts. He must get through the levee first, and we have troops there. The knight dismissed these concerns, and proceeded down the western path slowly. Many of them are native to Gilda, and have never seen his face. He could slip right through. West seems most likely. Let us go. The road carried the company for several days, as the Palo Mountains slowly shrank behind them. That's the end of chapter 6.